Hello again and welcome in for another episode of Manx Radio's newscast, an opportunity to delve into a topic in more depth than you may perhaps hear on the breakfast show Man in Line, Update or the hourly bulletins. Now, the Legislative Council is set to discuss removing the Bishop's vote for the first time in the Upper House. Ramsey MHK Lawrie Hooper's proposal has passed through the House of Keys and will now be subject to scrutiny by MLCs. If approved, it would see the religious figure retain a seat in Tynwald, but they would no longer be able to influence proceedings by way of a vote. I sat down with MLC Tanya August-Hanson to discuss the process it's likely to take from here. Tanya August-Hanson, removing the Bishop's vote has become a divisive topic, but the bill itself is due to appear for the first time in the Legislative Council. Your position in June 2023 on the Bishop is that he or she should retain a seat in Tynwald and have a vote. Is that right?
To a degree. So the reason why I stood up at the time was more for, they hadn't done the research before bringing something forward that when you change the vote on the backbench and that balance between the backbench and the executive, if you don't do your research beforehand and kind of give an indication as to what that balance will then look like, and you expect to get the votes, of those that are genuinely interested in the removal of the Bishop's vote, then you can't be surprised, if you get what I mean. I think it's really, really important that when we do make constitutional change, that we do it thoughtfully and we do it holistically, as opposed to doing it on the hoof. Because it's some pet project. I think it's very, very important that we do that very, very thoughtfully, like I said. But yes, it's coming forward into Legco, and I've agreed to move it in Legislative Council because I think it's important that when the House of Keys have told us by a majority that they want something to move forward, that we can't then turn around and not do our job, essentially. I think it's important that we do the job, that we do the scrutiny work, and that we take the policy that's been requested by Keys that we look at. So we will be looking at it. The principles is going through this time around, but likely what will happen from this point onwards is that we will have an evidence stage. I mean, I can't say that definitively because it's not up to me to move an evidence stage in Legislative Council. That will be up to one of my colleagues in Legislative Council to move, and I've not had an indication as to who that might be yet, but we have discussed that in the business and functioning of Legislative Council, that an evidence session might be requested or might be needed.
We'll come on to the evidence in just a moment, but you have been a member of Legco for a number of years now. What do you feel the Bishop brings to Tynwald?
I do think that the voice that's been made use of over the course of the last 5 years has been a really measured voice and has brought a different perspective. I think that the previous Bishop was very, very good at sort of recognising the things that hadn't been said, and usually they were the very human things that hadn't been said in the room. And I do think that's been valuable. That's not to say, by the way, that other members of Tynwald aren't capable of that, because I do think that they're very, very capable of that. And I think that certain individuals have definitely shown that over the years, of the many years that they've been in for as long as I have some. So it's not a case of that. That's not also to say that over the last few months we haven't had a Bishop, and that has then hampered our work. But the work, the voice that's been made use of over the last 5 years has been, in some cases, quite valuable, yes.
Could they not still bring that different perspective and that knowledge to a debate for politicians to consider without having a vote, though?
I think so, yes. I do believe that yes, I do think so. But I'm not in a position at the moment, in terms of like the job that Legco has to do. I think that Legislative Council now needs to take a different look from the one that Keys has taken. We need to look at whether or not it works, what those numbers then look like in terms of the balance. And we need to basically be looking at the long title and asking questions around the long title that perhaps haven't yet been considered so far. And I think that needs to be the general conversation. I think when you're moving constitutional legislation, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I think that we need to be very, very careful because, again, that holistic look is important. Everything that you do, you can't really do in bit parts. You need to be looking at the whole parliamentary piece as opposed to like little bits and pieces of it and tinkering with that. I think that, potentially there's a conversation about whether or not for constitutional legislative work, we might need a supermajority in both Keys and Council to make fundamental changes to our internal constitution.
We'll come back to the evidence, and I know that you said that that's not up to you whether that happens, but what would you be looking to get out of that? What could any possible evidence candidate bring to the table?
Well, hopefully just a different view than what we've already seen. Certain things that perhaps wouldn't have come out of the consultation, voices that wouldn't come out of the consultation, voices that will provide a different perspective and one that perhaps the House of Keys needs to hear, but also from individuals that I think probably bring the voice of the population as well, in ensuring that, what we're sending through has been properly considered. I don't know who those individuals will be. That's not for me to determine. I'm literally opening this up for Legislative Council I'm not walking into this with a sort of a pre-declared position on where my stance is personally. I'm literally just opening this up for LegCo to do the job that LegCo needs to do, following the Keys consideration. And I'm hoping that will be done thoroughly and properly and considered properly before it goes back to them.
Now, LegCo can't exercise an absolute veto on a piece of legislation.
No.
That power was removed in 1961, but
Yes.
MLCs could stall and delay proceedings quite significantly if they wanted to. Is that a fair comment?
It is a fair comment, yes. It's not going to happen in this case.
So you don't think that's likely at all?
No, I think that what's going to happen is, the worst that Keys can expect to see will be a delay in terms of making sure that the evidence stage is correctly, procedurally dealt with. And then it will follow the normal natural course. But in this case, it's probably because of the amount of Legislative Council sittings that we've actually got left, and the time that it'll take to get the evidence session right and to give the people that want to give evidence. This is if LegCo agree it, by the way, the evidence stage, then giving the right amount of time to get that procedure correct and for people to be able to get that time booked off work and their other commitments. So it will follow the normal course. Legislative Council do tend to take evidence on legislation. They have done before with domestic abuse, sex offences, with most recently as well with the employment legislation too, on certain specific elements of that. So it's not unusual for us to do it, and particularly with subject matter that will directly affect the branch, both in Legislative Council and also in Tynwald.
OK, so let's assume that LegCo has heard these evidence sessions, it's scrutinised the clause and is ready to vote. At what point in the year do you think that's likely to happen?
Oh, goodness knows. Probably before 2025. Probably before.
Okay, and will it be a simple majority or will it be a supermajority like you mentioned?
Oh, it'll be a simple majority in this case. Yeah, I think there's probably a case to have that conversation about more broadly about whether or not there should be a supermajority. But I think that would be a very separate conversation to the one about this particular bill.
Okay, so there won't be a supermajority for removing the vote of the bishop
no,
at
not
all?
At all. No.
Okay.
That would need to be agreed by both Keys and LegCo in the Standing Orders Committee, I think. And also the Standing Orders Committee would then need to make a recommendation to Tynwald for that change. But it's
because obviously there would be
not for this.
That danger that the new bishop would be installed in November at some point. They would be in Tynwald. And if there was a supermajority that was required, they could vote against it.
The only way that we could have a supermajority on any bill like this would be as if so the Standing Orders Committee of Tynwald is the one that takes decisions on our standing orders for both Legislative Council, Tynwald, and also for the House of Keys. So that committee would need to take a decision on whether or not they wanted to go for a supermajority for constitutional matters. And then they would need to then make that recommendation to Tynwald. Tynwald would need to sign that off before the standing orders could be changed. They're not even considering that at the moment. That's not even a consideration. It's not something that's been sent in for them to consider and look at.
And that's not something that you'll be putting forward at all?
No, not me personally. I have heard talk of it.
Okay. So is it a possibility?
Not for this bill, no.
Not at all.
It's absolutely not a possibility for this bill at all, no.
The Isle of Man is a Christian territory with more than half the population identifying with Christianity. Would they be right to feel hard done by if this bill goes through and the church can no longer have a say?
I think everybody has a right to feel the way that they feel about it. I'm a Christian and I'm moving it in council because I think we've got a job to do. Personally, I wouldn't feel hard done by, but other people would, and I don't judge them for that. But if we've got something that's coming through from the House of Keys and they're saying by majority that that's what they want us to look at, and they want us to look at the engineering of this particular piece of legislation, and they want us to send suggestions down to the House of Keys as to how we might improve it, and they want us to make that, do that second look, that second check, then we're just going to have to do the job, and we're going to have to do the job without looking at the fundamental underlying policy that they've already agreed.
The actual clause itself is not long at all, but what other things will LegCo be considering as part of those wider implications of implementing such a clause?
I think it will it won't be wider than the long title of the bill, unless, of course, the President agrees for the long title to be, or suggestion to go through to the drafters that the long title be changed. That would need to be agreed by the President, and then whatever amendment that might be would need to be agreed by Legislative Council before those kinds of discussions might be able to take place on wider implications. I mean, obviously, there are other pieces of legislation that are cited in the Isle of Man Constitution Bill, as it's currently named. Those, obviously, they will be sort of like checked and looked through to see if anything's been missed, but that aside, doubtful that there would be any further discussion, unless, of course, the conversation has taken place with the President with any one member of Legislative Council.
Okay, there has been heated debate in Keys, public consultation, lots of public comment, etc.
Yeah.
Do MLCs look at this when scrutinising bills like this, or do you try and go at it with a fresh pair of eyes?
No, we'll look at everything. So absolutely everything. Any documentation that sort of accompanies any piece of legislation that would go through the Keys, any Hansard, probably listen back again as well. We would go through any consultation documents. You would go through any attached document, maybe an explanatory note or anything like that. Obviously, we've got an explanatory memorandum that sits with it, which is quite light. We would look at all of that and probably read further as well. For example, there is some conversation and has been some conversation in the House of Keys about the name of the bill itself. We've got our domestic legislation that we produce. Do we need to write the Isle of Man Constitution Bill onto a piece of legislation? My personal view is not, but it sits and stands as it is. There has been some conversation about that. So I don't know if Legislative Council members will be picking that up. I've no idea. But that is the type of thing that might be sat on Hansard, that they might have a look at.
We'll talk about Hansard. I'm looking at one of your speeches in June 2023. Yeah. Towards the end, it says, and bearing in mind this was at a point where removing the bishop entirely was on the table, so this isn't the same in that sense. But you said, until a time when someone brings something back in front of me that proves irrefutably that the decision is right to remove him. What do you mean by proof?
What I meant by proof was exactly what I was talking about earlier with you. It is very much about the balance between the backbench and the executive in Tynwald more than anything else. And then also actually in Legislative Council in terms of, the contributions of the bishop regarding the vote. And what does that actually look like? What has it looked like over the years? What would removing it then look like? So basically running the numbers, essentially. Does it look, is that okay? Because when you are, like I said, when you are looking at constitutional reform, I do think that you need to be looking at it holistically. It isn't a case of just removing something without actually doing that research and without understanding those implications and without basically getting those implications on Hansard for people to look at down the line when they're looking back at this situation. How did that come about? How did that then affect the way that decisions were then made in both Tynwald and Legislative Council? That's all I was asking for. And actually, I'd already asked the Clerk of Tynwald for that information back when I made that speech. That information was available to Keys members at that point. All they needed to do was ask the question, and I did suggest that the question be asked, but nobody asked the question. So it's a case of literally just that small bit of proof, getting it on Hansard for posterity, providing people with the information so that when it's looked back at down the line, we have a clear understanding of exactly what constitutional change has happened and how that's then affected the votes.
Okay, and just one last question. When I say that there's been lots of public comment, is LegCo only looking at responses to the public consultation, or are there other factors as well, like if someone was to write to an MLC, or if someone was to comment on Facebook, are those things considered as well?
Yeah, write to us, contact us. All of our contact details are online. Feel free to. That's what we're here for.
Does that necessarily align with Tynwald's perception of LegCo being impartial?
No, I don't think so. I think it's gathering evidence. And that's what we do. We're all a bunch of nerds in Legislative Council. I've said that to you before, I think. We are very, very interested in people's, understandings of things. We want them to get in, everybody to get in touch with us if they have a strong feeling over these things. And it is important they might provide us with a different perspective that perhaps we've not considered before. So do it. That's what we're here for. We're here to serve the people. We have a job or a role description, and in that role description there is a very small part and it is a very, very big job about people that have views, small communities on the Isle of Man that have certain views over certain things, and we do have responsibility for constituents' responsibility over those small minority views. So please send them in if you feel strongly about this, you think that you provide a different perspective, then do so. All of our contact details are on the Tynwald website.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Manx Radio newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.